Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Dana Perino, filling in tonight for Tucker. There's new developments tonight in the attempted assassination of Republican lawmakers during a baseball practice Wednesday night. Federal law enforcement officials have confirmed to Fox that shooter James Hodgkinson carried a list of Republican lawmakers' names during the shooting. Meanwhile, the shooting has provoked violent rhetoric from some on the American left. After the shooting, Jim Devine, a Democratic strategist in New Jersey, tweeted the following: "We are in a war with selfish, foolish, and narcissistic rich people. Why is it a shock when things turn violent? Hashtag Hunt Republican Congressman." Even after drawing criticism, Devine refused to apologize, tweeting, "I am sorry if my Hunt Republican Congressman hashtag hurt the feelings of any GOP snowflakes, but you have not engaged in civil discourse." For more on these ongoing developments, we're joined by Fox Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine, what have you learned?
Well, thank you, Dana. Federal law enforcement officials tell Fox News tonight that the suspect, 66-year-old James Hodgkinson, had a list of names, and we have confirmed at least 6 names were on the list. And based on our reporting, the lawmakers are all associated with the conservative House Freedom Caucus. The handwritten list also included the congressional office room numbers on Capitol Hill. Investigators are trying to determine whether Hodgkinson was trying to visit the offices in person or interact with the congressman. The list includes Scott Desjardins of Tennessee, Trent Franks of Arizona, Jeff Duncan of South Carolina, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Mo Brooks of Alabama, and Morgan Griffith of Virginia. Fox News understands that the Capitol Hill police had reached out independently to all of the offices on the list. Tonight, the offices are not commenting for our reporting. Meantime, the FBI remains on the scene in Alexandria, Virginia, where agents are mapping out the ballistics and the trajectory of the bullets. A complete analysis will help investigators to determine the number of shots fired and the direction from which they originated. Law enforcement officials are cautioning Fox tonight against drawing conclusions about the list and the suspect's motivations for having it until more information is available. Dana.
All right, Catherine, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We just told you about Jim Devine. He's a Democratic strategist in New Jersey who tweeted with Hunt Republicans and Hunt Republican Congressman hashtags. Are these violent words and deeds on the left getting the attention they deserve? We're joined now by John Daniel Davidson. He's a senior correspondent for The Federalist. Thank you so much for being here. Earlier today, you wrote a piece in which one of the things you start off by saying is that left-wing student activism is beginning to creep off campus and into mainstream life. What has been that trajectory, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think that we've seen a gradual escalation in left-wing rhetoric, but also left-wing violence, right? It starts on campus, and most things that start on campus end up in, mainstream public life. And for anybody who cares to do the research, going back over the past year and a half, there are dozens of incidences of political violence specifically against Trump supporters and Republicans by progressive Democratic activists. So, political violence at some level is something that some on the left are comfortable with. And sometimes you find a guy who's willing to go way, way too far, and that's what we had this week.
The violence really has been shocking, and I think we have the video of one of the tapes that makes me cringe every time I see it. It was a Trump supporter. He's at a protest, and he gets hit in the head and the face with a lock.
Your client.
Yeah, this sort of thing is, we saw it through the campaign, and to be fair, we saw it on both sides, okay? You had Trump supporters sucker punching protesters at Trump rallies, and it's ugly, and it should be condemned no matter who's doing it. But let's be honest, the mainstream media treats political violence differently when it comes from the right than when it comes from the left. And I think that you see that even now in the news coverage, 48 hours after this shooting, we've moved on. The national news cycle has moved on, and the top story is Mike Pence got a lawyer. Give me a break.
Well, the other thing that we just heard from Catherine Herridge is the reporting tonight that we know that Hodgkinson was carrying around a list. So the targeting was obviously, it wasn't just Republicans in general. I mean, it was absolutely, talk about hunting congressmen. He actually had a list, and that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and these stories don't get the attention that they should. A lot of people don't remember the name Floyd Lee Corkins. He was the guy that stormed into the Family Research Council in 2012
yes, in
with a
Colorado
9mm. That's right. And he was intent on shooting as many people there as he could. And a heroic security guard stopped him, was wounded in the process. But this guy confessed that he got the idea. He was inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. The Southern Poverty Law Center is considered by the mainstream media and people in D.C. as a respectable organization that still has its hate map up today. You can pull it up online. You know, so when we talk about political violence inspiring actual, you know, or political rhetoric inspiring violence, we don't see the same kind of coverage when it comes from the left as when it comes from the right.
Last night on The Five, Greg Gutfeld walked through a list of several of the incidences that, as you write about also in your article today. And I wonder if you get the sense in any of your research that the left is actually taking pause a little bit and saying, wait, okay, maybe we do actually have some responsibility here, and it's not just the right. I mean, I'm not sure if we're actually seeing that. I mean, there's been some loose talk about that this week, but it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
I think the left is eager not to talk about this and to move on to the Trump investigation, to you know, move on to other things. But we really do need to talk about this, and we need to have a national conversation that tries to bring the temperature down. And the reason I think the mainstream media and a lot of people on the left, especially, you know, Democratic leadership, doesn't want to talk about it is because they know that the violent rhetoric and the actual violence is, for the most part, right now, coming from the left.
And it's not fun and games anymore. Somebody actually got hurt. Several people got hurt. And we have one of the victims is still in serious condition, and Scalise, the congressman who was injured, is in critical condition still. John, thank you for your reporting. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now on to an update about House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. We were just talking about him. Today, his wife, Jennifer, released a statement which was read by Scalise's chief of staff.
On behalf of Steve and our children, I want to thank everyone from the bottom of our hearts for the incredible amount of prayers and warm wishes that we've received since Wednesday's events. We are especially appreciative of the strong outpouring of love and support from our neighbors, friends from across Louisiana and across the country, as well as President Trump, Vice President Pence, and all of Steve's colleagues who have reached out during this challenging time.
Also today, a doctor at MedStar Washington Hospital Center spoke about Scalise's condition, revealing how close he came to dying in Wednesday's attack.
Congressman Scalise sustained a single rifle wound that entered in the area of the left hip. It traveled directly across towards the other hip in what we call a transpelvic gunshot wound. The round fragmented and did substantial damage to bones, internal organs, and blood vessels. I understand he was awake on scene, but by the time he was transported by helicopter to the MedStar Trauma Center, he was in shock. In the operating room, he was in critical condition and received many units of transfused blood for ongoing hemorrhage from multiple locations. He received truly amazing anesthesia care from Dr. Eric Skolnick and Dr. Scott Frank. Due to their great work, we were able to get him through that procedure, and we then took him to the radiology suite, where he underwent an additional procedure by Dr. Arshad Khan to further control bleeding. From there, we went to the intensive care unit, where he got additional care under the direction of Dr. Chadi Abouasali, and he remains in the ICU today. Yesterday, Dr. Trankium and I did an additional operation, and Dr. Robert Golden, our director of orthopedic trauma, did an operation to repair a broken bone in his leg. The congressman's status remains critical. We are encouraged by improvement in his condition over the last 36 hours. We have controlled the internal bleeding, and his vital signs have stabilized. He will require additional operations to manage abdominal injuries and other bone injuries. Predicting the length of his hospital stay is difficult today. Presumably it will be easier in some days when more time has passed and we have more information. After he leaves the hospital, he will require a period of healing and of rehabilitation. On behalf of the MedStar Trauma Team, I want to thank the special agents on the scene as well as the first responders for everything that they did for those shooting victims. We are all well aware here at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center of all that those folks did to save these people.
Congressman Scalise was visited at the hospital today by a good friend of his, Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. So the media have been targeting Republicans, and on Monday, HuffPost had to delete an entire article after they fell for a bogus anti-Trump memo. The fake memo claimed Donald Trump's presidential campaign paid thousands of dollars to boost itself on the popular website Reddit. Then on Thursday, the New York Times tried to blame Sarah Palin for the 2011 shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, even though that connection had been debunked years ago. Joe Concha writes about media for The Hill, and he joins us here live. Joe, did you hear anything that internally at the New York Times that there was consternation by reporters that this had actually happened at their paper?
In terms of internal debate of whether it happened?
Right, or just like dismay about it? Because even in their own reporting in the paper, they had actually debunked this years ago.
No, because this came from the editorial board. It didn't come from Charles Blow or Paul Krugman, a partisan type of columnist. Mm-hmm. This is the heart and brains of the New York Times saying this is what definitively happened. Mm-hmm. And then even PolitiFact said there was no evidence of this whatsoever after the fact. Here are my problems with what the New York Times has done since. The story has not come down. Remember when Reagan said, tear down this wall?
Right.
The New York Times needs to tear down this story, at least HuffPost. They took down the story. That's the responsible thing to do. You go online right now, the New York Times, you still see that story. I say to the New York Times, tear down this story. And by the way, the correction's at the bottom, not the top of the bottom.
I remember having been a press secretary for a long time, when you finally get a reporter to actually run a correction. The correction, you know, especially if it was like weekly newspapers, it would run the next week and it would be in a box and you could barely see it. But I do think the New York Times has taken a bit of a hit because of social media. So the right has finally sort of caught up with the left on social media. And now a lot of people know that this is what the New York Times did.
The blowback was overwhelming. And what got their attention is when somebody like MSNBC's Chris Hayes says this is nonsense, right? So then they're saying this isn't just right coming after us because of the New York Times. Everybody had a problem with this. But the problem in these situations is that there's an old saying that a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth can even get its pants on.
Right.
The allegation always sticks. The exoneration, not so much.
I've even found myself, so like, talk about HuffPost for a second. So they see this memo, they run the article, and I understand what it's like. They're trying to get to the story first. But I found myself even more reticent to actually react to any articles, even if I'm just commenting on Twitter, because it seems like most of these articles have to be revised in some way.
Oh, always. It seems. It's now the new pattern because we're in a world now where it's quantity over quality because we're dealing with technology, online information. Everybody always talks about...
Well, and how they get paid, right? You get paid by the click.
By the click, exactly. And I remember at Mediaite, we had guys that would have to push out like 10, 15, 20 stories a day because you got to constantly feed the beast.
Right, and it's not easy to keep up with that. Do you think the media has any sort of time to reflect after what happened this past week, and will they be slightly more careful on both sides? I'm not just blaming the left.
Can I take an old VCR term? Rewind the tape to November 9th of 2016, and we heard about soul searching and getting it right and being more careful with our stories and triple checking. It's only gotten worse because there's never any accountability. The news cycle moves so fast, 10 times faster than when you were press secretary. So
I know.
No one remembers the mistake because we're already on to story 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, so I talked to Sean Spicer, the current press secretary, and I told him, like, even when I left in January of 2009, I didn't even have a Twitter account. So even though the principles of the job are the same, the tactics have changed dramatically, and it's hard to keep up. But at least you have a way to fight back now that more people can see it than ever before. And I think that's why President Trump continues to tweet.
Everybody has a megaphone. That said, the president needs to step back on his tweeting a little bit because at last check, it was great for him during the election. No one would argue that. He could bypass the media, bypass the whole filter. But now that he's president, he doesn't have to do this as much anymore. He has the ultimate bully pulpit. He's the most powerful man in the world.
But I don't know. I'm kind of an outlier on that. I think that if he wants to tweet, I think that he's very transparent.
Do you think it's done more harm or good for him since he's been elected, his tweets?
I think it is, well, if you get a special counsel, that's probably not very good. That'd be like a net negative. But I think overall, communication-wise, it's a net plus for him.
He just needs to control it a little bit more. Everything in moderation, Dana.
All right. All right, Joe, thank you so much.
Good to see you.
All right, President Trump announced a reversal of President Obama's Cuba policies, fulfilling another campaign promise. Up ahead, we'll discuss how well the president has done at following through on his campaign agenda. Plus, pro-immigrant groups are starting a 24/7 hotline to monitor immigration raids in Colorado. Is this an effort to sabotage U.S. immigration enforcement? We'll discuss it with our panel. This is a Fox News alert. A U.S. warship has suffered a collision at sea. The guided missile cruiser USS Fitzgerald collided with a merchant ship about 50 miles southeast of a major U.S. naval base in Japan. The total casualty count is still being determined, but 7 sailors are missing, while another injured sailor was airlifted from the ship by helicopter. 3 compartments on the Fitzgerald flooded, but the Navy says the ship is not in danger of sinking. Tugboats are attempting to tow the Fitzgerald back to a Japanese port for repairs. All right, President Trump was in Miami today, where he announced the reinstatement of travel and trade restrictions between the U.S. and Cuba for the sake of bringing down the country's communist regime. Take a listen.
Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba. We will not lift sanctions on the Cuban regime until all political prisoners are freed. Freedoms of assembly and expression are respected. All political parties are legalized, and free and internationally supervised elections are scheduled. The return of the cop killer, Joanne Chesimard. Stop jailing innocent people. So to the Castro regime, I repeat, the harboring of criminals and fugitives will end. You have no choice. It will end.
The new restrictions are the latest campaign promise kept by President Trump. This week, he also closed a green energy office at the Department of Energy and partially rolled back an Obama-era program protecting illegal immigrants from deportation. Mercedes Schlapp is a Washington Times columnist. Don Calloway is former Democratic state representative from Missouri. They both join us. Thank you so much for a Friday night appearance. Mercy, if I could start with you, because I thought that President Trump actually spoke about human rights and the terrible situation that communism can cause in a country in very passionate terms. And I feel like this one actually really set him on a course to fulfilling a campaign promise, even if it wasn't the parade of horribles that his opponents thought it would be.
Right. Well, not only was it keeping to a campaign promise by President Trump, it was also dismantling the Obama legacy. Remember, it was President Obama who sat alongside, very cozy with the dictator Raul Castro in a baseball field, while you had President Trump today embracing a former political prisoner, a woman who had been in jail for 15 years under the Castro regime. He sent a very strong message to the Cuban community, not only in Miami, but also in the island, in basically saying we are not going to support the Cuban military and the intelligence community in Cuba, the ones who profit from these business transactions with the United States. We want to take it into the best interest of the Cuban people and empower the Cuban people on the island who are oppressed every day by Fidel Castro. This is a stark contrast to what we saw with President Obama and his weak deal that he pushed forward during his administration.
Don, could you see some futility? I know that you disagree with what President Trump did today, but because there are reports that human rights violations had actually worsened since the policy, I mean, do you think that this is actually somewhat reasonable, since he didn't go all the way to reverse everything the president had put forward, President Obama put forward? For example, the embassies will stay, wet foot, dry foot policy, that will remain the same. But if human rights violations had actually worsened, could you see some benefit in what President Trump did today?
You know, Dana, this is purely about partisan politics. There are a substantial amount of Cuban Americans here in the United States, mostly concentrated in Florida and led by the voice of Senator Marco Rubio, who's a very dynamic Republican leader. This is about pandering to that Republican section. And this does nothing to benefit the American people in a very realistic sense, nor does it do anything to benefit the Cuban people. The fact of the matter is that there are totalitarian regimes all around this world who continuously and regularly participate in commerce with the United States, and we really have no interest in banning trade or travel with them because it does nothing to advance either side's American politics. So, you know, I understand that we should not be supporting or underwriting human rights abuses anywhere in the world, but this is specifically focused on Cuba because, one, it's an attempt to undo the Obama legacy of opening up the world to trade and friendship, and B, it's about furthering the Cuban bond with the Republican Party. It doesn't really do anything.
Having a friendship with a Cuban dictator, I find that to be quite appalling. I mean, my father was thrown into jail for 6 years under the Castro regime. They took away his properties. They basically, my father had to flee the country. This Castro regime that has been in power for over 50 years, causing atrocious human rights violations. We should not be trading with these thugs.
Nor should we be trading with Saudi Arabia. Nor should we be trading with Saudi Arabia, nor should we be trading with China, nor should we be trading with Angola or many of the African nations who we continue to get oil and commerce from. There are human rights violators.
There are human rights violations, that the human rights violations stop.
There are human rights violators across. There are human rights violators across the world. This is about Republican politics, and I understand it. I don't support the Castro regime. I think that what happened to your father and generations of Cuban Americans is terrible. But to single out Cuba is a direct attack at the Obama legacy. Let's call it what it is.
All right, well, they'll have to continue to answer that. But let's talk to a broader, bigger picture. Don, what do you think about the fact that President Trump has been able to basically roll back a lot of what President Obama tried to do, partly because he didn't get it passed in legislation. You know, executive action is not as strong. And it's been fairly quiet. You know, there's not been big blockbuster deals yet, but has it been somewhat effective?
Well, he is not even slowly but surely, but very swiftly and rapidly chipping away at the Obama legacy. My concern here is that it's not necessarily with an eye towards what's best for the American people, but it seems to me to be an eye towards fulfilling campaign promises and just swiping away at the Obama legacy in a very partisan way, regardless of what's best for the American people. If you look at the action with DAPA today, how does that best serve the interests of the American people to deport dozens of thousands, potentially, Americans who have been in this country for years and years, if not generations, contributing to our country, making this country a better place, paying taxes, being honest, law-abiding citizens? It doesn't do anything good what he did today with DAPA.
And yet, Mercy, I'll let you respond to that and also address the thing that the Dreamers actually had some good news today. I think that it's really interesting that a lot of the media did not actually lead with the fact that the Dreamers are actually getting to be protected, and that the president, I guess, flip-flopped on that from a campaign promise, but I would imagine that the left actually thinks that that's a good deal. What do you think, Mercy?
Right. I think actually that's on the Dreamer side, it's one of something that President Trump thought through and decided to basically keep that order, executive order, as is. Obviously, this is an issue that needs to be resolved in Congress. It's an issue that during the Bush years, we had to deal with in terms of where we move forward on immigration reform. It's where we need legislation to figure out where we go next in dealing with illegal immigration in America, and also ensuring that there is a humane and a pathway towards whether it be residency, citizenship for individuals who have been here for a long time. And those are the debates that have to happen in Congress along with President Trump. So I think that's going to be a critical component.
And it's actually a place, I think, where Mercedes and Don, you could actually help people get together on an immigration reform bill. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Dana,
I'm sorry, Don, we've got to run.
We agree.
Okay, sure. I knew you did. I knew you did. All right. Thank you so much. A new 24/7 hotline aims to track every immigration raid in Colorado. Is the goal to hinder ICE's effectiveness in enforcing the law? So a coalition of 8 pro-immigrant groups in Colorado is launching an emergency hotline in response to recent raids by ICE. The Colorado Response Network, as it's being called, will operate 24 hours a day. Anytime a person believes they see an ongoing immigration raid, they can call the hotline, which will then confirm the raid and dispatch a legal observer to monitor ICE. So is this all a big effort to sabotage the enforcement of American laws? Elvira Salazar is an anchor for Mega TV. Francisco Hernandez is a Texas immigration attorney. They both join us. Elvira, you think this is a good idea. Why?
No, I think this is a very bad idea.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I read your points, and you think that it's a bad idea because it will actually put more people in danger?
Well, I think it's a very bad idea because it's sending a message to the American people that Hispanics were a bunch of lunatics, that we want to protect the bad hombres, that we want to, because this hotline, what it's going to do is going to send the message to the bad hombres when ICE is coming. So the bad hombres are going to be having a field day, and the good hombres are going to be a very bad day, because we got to understand that our community is terrorized,
right.
it's
so
under
your point was
threat
that this
because
will
they don't
actually
know.
protect the bad guys and make it more dangerous for actually law-abiding people who should not actually have to deal with a raid like this. Francisco, you actually think that this is a good idea. Tell me why.
You know what? Let's lay it out. It's in the open government chapter. Listen, I spoke to 2 ICE agents, and they not only think it's a good idea, the ICE agents actually say, you know what? Let's stream it live. Let's put body cams. Let's lay it out. If we think it's okay, it's okay. If we think it's not, it's not. But you know what? This is just a pretext to put it on ICE and ICE agents. They're police officers, they're law enforcement. We are diverting from what really is the issue here. Where's Congress? I mean, President Trump, whether you like him or not,
right.
I'm not a trumpet, don't get me wrong. But you know what? Let's get to Congress. They're chicken. They're chicken. Democrats and Republicans are chicken.
What do you want the Congress to do?
And they're not going to act because they're scared. Let's get on to immigration reform. Let's live stream these raids. If they're there, what's wrong with it? If they're bad, they're bad. We will change the culture of this country. If they're humanitarian, as most of ICE agents I know, let's go with it. But we're diverting from what we need to do.
But Elvira, would you not agree that ICE is actually trying to enforce the laws, that they're trying to actually find the bad hombres, as you call them, get them out of the country so that people who are here legally can be more fulfilled in their lives?
Yes. And I think that is exactly what we need to do, and we need to follow what President Trump has said. We need to find 2 to 3 million people that are the bad hombres, the illegals that should not be here. We should kick them out.
How do you do that without ICE raids? How do you do that if you don't have the federal government actually doing this type of work?
Because because what I think we need to have clear rules that we don't have. The feds need to sit with the cities and with the states and say, okay, these are the people that we want. We want people that are drug dealers, that are gang members. We don't want everybody, because it's true that they are illegals and they have broken the law. We get that, but not everybody is deportable. Right now, we need to have clear rules. The feds need to sit with the cities and say, bring me or give me the ones that I have on this list.
Well, Francisco, you're an immigration lawyer, and is what she's describing actually possible?
You know, ICE doesn't need help. ICE is very good at what they do. They don't need the cities. There's no such thing as a sanctuary city. It's a political phantom. Everybody's afraid of it. Nobody can touch it. But it doesn't exist. A city cannot oppose the federal government. We don't need the state's help.
But the message that is sending is that we Hispanics, we want to protect criminals when we want to support the sanctuary city. So it's true what you're saying. There is not a legal definition as to what a sanctuary city is, but nonetheless is making us look really bad.
Well, would you support then, Francisco, would you support the Supreme Court actually then finally ruling on this issue of sanctuary cities? Because it's almost as if you could agree, that you both agree. You don't think that they need to do that?
It has nothing. It is a waste of time. The Supreme's going to say a city or a state cannot oppose the federal government.
But you don't think the cities and states need to hear that from the federal government so that we could actually get about the business of allowing ICE doing what they are asked to do by Congress?
But they have heard it ever since Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, Farmers Branch. We've been trying to put Band-Aids on this issue for 17 years. I mean,
well, that is correct, and that's why we need an immigration reform law, and you said it right. And then here we agree on that. We need an immigration reform law.
Okay, this is your chance then. Here on a Friday night, I'm going to give you a chance, both of you. Elvira, what are the top 3 things you want to see in an immigration reform bill then? What do you think would actually help solve the problem, protect legal people who are here, and keep them safe?
Please, first.
The people that do not have a serious criminal record should be given some type of legality. Maybe not citizenship, but legality. And they will be very happy. 50% of the illegals in this country have been here for more than 15 years. Those people have homes, cars, kids, churches, friends, right? So those people may deserve maybe to get some type of legality, because those people are helping the economy and doing jobs that other people do not want to do, people that have benefits.
Francisco,
right?
you're an
Number
immigration
one.
attorney.
Let me add to it.
Can that actually
Let me
work?
add to it. And let me add to it.
Okay.
Nobody deserves anything in immigration. There are no rights. There are no rewards for immigration. There's opportunity. There are people that dying to get to this country, dying, hanging under trains, trying to get to the promised land. Let's just give them a chance to earn it. Earn it. Temporary worker visas is the lowest common denominator, but Democrats and Republicans both oppose it.
Well, I guess we'll have to see if the Congress decides to work with President Trump on that. Maybe they can get something done. All right,
that's right. Trump can be for immigration what Nixon was for China.
Said that he is. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For 3 years, he's led a reign of terror in Syria and Iraq. Now, Russia says they may have finally killed the leader of ISIS. Is he really gone? Russia says one of its airstrikes may have killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State. Meanwhile, a U.S. official tells Fox that the Defense Department plans to deploy 4,000 additional U.S. troops to Afghanistan to shore up the country's government. The Pentagon has yet to confirm the new deployment. We have Michael Waltz. He's a former Green Beret commander and former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. I used to sit with him sometimes in the Situation Room. He joins us now. Michael, first to the report about the possibility that al-Baghdadi could be dead. I mean, we've heard this before, but what do you think about reports so far?
Well, look, I take anything that the Russians say with a huge grain of salt. It still has to be confirmed. But if he's dead, I do think this will have an effect on the battlefield. It could precipitate the end of ISIS as a state, as it's been calling itself. Its capital in Raqqa is surrounded, and U.S.-backed forces are moving into those neighborhoods as we speak. Mosul in Iraq, the second city that ISIS controls, has virtually fallen. Now, let's see what comes after, and I'm worried about the day after the political solution there. ISIS will be done as a state, but it will not be done as a movement, and I expect to see it to move into insurgency mode. And Dana, I just wanted to say, look, these attacks are necessary that decapitate ISIS's leadership, that keep them on their back foot. If they're worried about how they're going to sleep at night and whether they're going to survive through the night, they don't have time to plot, plan, and attack Europe and the United States. But we have to keep the pressure on, and then we have to keep a longer-term strategy in place that's going to undermine the ideology. So
you were in Special Ops, and you understand a lot of what's been happening in Afghanistan. Would you support the idea of the Pentagon sending 4,000 more troops? And what do you think their best and highest use would be once they get to the country?
Well, the troops that are going to Afghanistan, let me be clear, not going to be kicking in doors and pulling triggers. They're going to be advisors that are helping the Afghan army get to a better place, get to a position of strength, and to keep the Taliban on their back foot. We need to do that to keep the Taliban from making more gains this summer. There's a lot of commentary on kind of how hard this is. We've been there 15 years. Where is this going? We do need a broader and better strategy in place. Mattis has promised that to the President, Secretary Mattis. But the key, though, I just want to say is we have to deal with Pakistan. No insurgency is going to be defeated as long as their headquarters is safe, and right now they're safe in Pakistan.
It's interesting that you say that. So I have been wondering why it is that, Pakistan has been fairly quiet. You don't even read many articles about it. It used to be on the front pages all the time. Why is that?
Well, I think the Pakistanis are kind of, laying low at this point and figuring out what the administration is going to do. I think we need to send the Pakistanis a very clear signal that business as usual that we've been doing the last 15 years is over. They need to take action against the Taliban and Haqqani, meaningful action this time in the affiliated Haqqani network. And look, Dana, we really don't have a choice but to commit these troops. There's a lot of hand-wringing about it. I understand that. But I want to make clear that if the Taliban retake Afghanistan, ISIS and al-Qaeda will be in their wake. They will attack the United States again, and then what? So I think we need to be honest with the American people that we're going to be engaged